Welcome to the Rum Revival. My name's Arminder. It's time we talked about what might be one of the most hyped rum releases ever. Appleton Estate 17-year-old legend. Why is it a big deal? Why is it a legend? And why are some folks upset about it? Let's break it all down. So starting in April, Appleton through their social media started building up hype for the return of what they were calling a legend. They purposely kept it vague, not really saying what that legend was. All this buildup was for this May 17th date that they kept on referencing. Eventually May 17th came around, and on their social media they finally pulled the curtains back to reveal Appleton Estate's 17-year-old legend. Now for some people the reveal wasn't a total surprise. See, about a year prior, certain sleuthing rum nerds found the label for the rum on the TTB's website. See, all spirits have to have their label approved in advance by the TTB, and a record of that approval is then made publicly available online. So for the hyperly aware and hyperly online rum folks, it wasn't a surprise. But for the general non-obsessed public, yes, this was a surprise. Let's focus on why people are excited about this rum. And to do that, we just need to look at the label over here, which says it's a recreation of the legendary rum crafted by Wray and Nephew in the 1940s. So why is that a big deal? So the legendary rum in question is Wray and Nephew 17 year, which is the rum that was used by Trader Vic in 1944 to create the original Mai Tai. So yeah, that's kind of a big deal. But it becomes an even bigger deal because supplies of the 17-year-old rum only lasted so long. So by the late 1940s, Vic had to switch to the Wray and Nephew 15 year. And then supplies of the 15 year were getting so low, so starting in the 1950s, Trader Vic started stretching what was remaining of the 15 stock by adding additional rums to it. Then in the mid-50s, when stock of the 15 year was pretty much done, Trader Vic's changed to a blend of two different rums. And then over the decades, the blend shifted over and over again. So the original 17 year has over the decades become this kind of mythic thing, the quote unquote authentic rum to make a Mai Tai with. Like if you want to make a Mai Tai as it was meant to be in its purest form, then you have to make it with Wray and Nephew 17. Which is impossible since it hasn't been available since the 40s. So yeah, as you can imagine, something like that becomes a bit of a holy grail. A legend, if you will. Oh, and to avoid any confusion, Wray and Nephew is the immediate parent company that owns Appleton Estate, both the physical estate and the brand. Now back in the day, the company was primarily releasing rums under the Wray and Nephew brand, not the Appleton brand, even though Wray and Nephew 17 was made at the Appleton Estate. Make sense? Good. Now over the years, folks have been asking Appleton if and when they'd ever re-release Wray and Nephew 17, and they were always like non-committal about it. Appleton makes a 21-year-old rum, so for some folks it was like, well, you're already making a rum that's 21 years old, why can't you just release one that's 17 years old? But it's actually not that easy. See, Wray and Nephew 17 was a blend of 4 very specific marcs. And marcs are base rums that a distillery makes that they can then blend together to make all sorts of different rum releases. And Appleton stopped making some or all of these 4 marcs decades ago. So you couldn't just use existing rum inventory, blend it together, and then release it as Wray and Nephew 17. I mean, you could, but it's not the real deal. You kind of have to start from scratch and then wait 17 years. And also some have thought that the recipes for these marcs might have been lost over the years, and that's why Appleton never got around to recreating it. But according to Joy Spence, the master blender at Appleton, those marcs were being made as late as 1981 when she first started working for the company. And the formulas for those marcs were recorded by her predecessor, so they actually had everything they needed to make those marcs again and therefore recreate Wray and Nephew 17. And to everyone's surprise, apparently back in 2005, they went ahead and distilled the 4 marcs for this release. And of the 4, there was one marc in particular that wasn't so easy to make. And I'm quoting Joy Spence here, there's one particular marc that is so unique and you had to set the ferment in a particular way and distill in a particular way, which is not what we're doing now for the other estate marcs. Not entirely sure exactly what that means in terms of production, but let's just assume it means that it was an out of the ordinary thing that they had to do to make that marc, and it was not something that they could easily repeat. So that's everything that happened up until this point. And that gets us to this rum right here. So what exactly then is Appleton Estate's 17-year-old legend? Unlike the core lineup of Appleton products, this is a 100% pot still rum, and it's a blend of those 4 rare marcs that I mentioned. It was distilled in 2005 and then bottled in 2022, giving us those 17 years. And it was aged in ex-bourbon barrels and bottled at 49% ABV. Now the one obvious thing to call out here is that Appleton decided to not use the Wray and Nephew name for this release. Instead, they went with the Appleton brand, which kind of makes sense as from a branding perspective, more people are just familiar with the Appleton brand, and any press and goodwill that comes out of this release, well, they'd want to channel that back into their actual brand and not what would essentially be a lesser used brand that for the larger consumer base doesn't really have any real significance or ties to Appleton. Now, all of that is good and great. Finally, we get to try and buy this long lost rum that is key to really experiencing what's an iconic cocktail. Amazing. What's there not to love about this? Well, for many people, there's a lot to not love about this release. See, while everyone was stoked that this was coming back, the details and circumstances around the release itself, well, that's what people weren't too happy about. There are a couple of reasons for that, starting with the quantity. There are only 1,500 bottles available, which might seem like a lot, but that's globally. 1,500 spread around the world. And supposedly in the US, we're only getting about 300 bottles. And something like this will only really go to certain markets in the US, like your New Yorks, your Californias, sorry Iowa, which means chances of you just stumbling onto this rum are pretty low, if non-existent. And then there's the price, a suggested retail price of $500, which is a lot of money for most people. Now, if you're balling out of control, then hey, it's no thing, but for most rum drinkers, even $100 is a lot for a bottle. I think the most I ever spent is like $215 for a bottle, and I think it took a lot of thinking before I actually pulled the trigger. So a lot of folks are bummed that it's that expensive for something that they feel is a rum meant for making a cocktail with. I think there's a general perception that rums made for cocktails are supposed to be cheaper than rums meant for sipping. Now, of course, any rum can be used to make a cocktail or to be sipped. Price shouldn't matter. Now, all of this doesn't even factor in the fact that that $500 price tag is a suggested price. Chances are that some retailers that do get their hands on it could inflate that price. I mean, can you blame them when some folks will likely flip that rum for much more on the secondary market? And speaking of the secondary market, unless you're able to quickly find and snag a bottle upon the initial release, which is kind of happening now, really you're almost more likely to come across this in the secondary market, and Lord knows how much people are going to be trying to sell it for. So yeah, you're probably not going to be able to find it, and even if you do, it's likely going to cost you an arm and a leg. You can kind of see the frustration here, especially for something that, again, in people's mind is a rum to make a Mai Tai with. Not that I'm saying that's the accurate way of thinking about it, but for many that is the narrative. For many, this is a rum that they have dreamt of their entire life of getting to try, and now that it's finally here, well, they'll never be able to try it. Oh, and I haven't even touched on the whole NFT thing. Yeah, see, on May 17th, when the rum was revealed, Appleton sent out an email newsletter revealing that 17 early access bottles were available for snagging up right away. All you had to do was buy an NFT through blockbar.com. Now you then redeem that NFT and you get a bottle. I think it's fair to say that most folks either don't get or don't like or don't trust the whole NFT thing. So yeah, that left a weird, odd taste in their mouth. I do think it's important to keep one thing in mind, and that is that this rum is not exactly Wray and Nephew 17. I mean, sure, Appleton may have followed the formula to the T when it comes to fermentation and distillation, but there are other factors to consider. First off, molasses. The molasses that was available to Appleton in the 1920s is likely different than what they're using now. Likely it's coming from a different source, different quality, and different levels of sugar. And then there's the equipment. Did they use the same equipment to ferment and distill the marcs? Do they still use equipment from the 1920s? I don't know, there's no real information indicating either way, but if they aren't, then that could possibly introduce some variance in the final product. And then there's aging. See, the original rum was aged in puncheons, which are 2.5 times bigger than a bourbon barrel, which is what Appleton 17 Legend was aged in. So why does that matter? Well, the bigger the size of the cask, the less the overall rum has contact with the wood. So all other things being equal, the rum aged in a puncheon will have less wood notes as part of its flavor profile. Look, all of these examples might seem like I'm being pedantic, but I think it's still worth just acknowledging that this is Appleton's best attempt at recreating the rum given modern practices, and not the rum 100% exactly as it was. Now, you can't actually do a taste test against the original, but hey, in Joy Spence we trust. Now, I've done a lot of talking about the rum. Let's finally give it a taste. So my initial impression is that there's not a whole lot of intensity. It's not immediately hitting you over the head with like overripe, Technicolor, funky banana, and pineapple. Like the Appleton core range, this stuff is a bit more demure and not in your face. You really have to be patient and let it slowly envelop you, and then you start picking up all sorts of notes. So there's these deeper notes that first become apparent. There's like a rustic earthiness that I pick up. There's this like undercurrent of like dried leaves or tea, kind of maybe leaning in the direction of tobacco. And I'm also getting a little bit of leather and cloves. It kind of evokes the sense of wearing a brown leather jacket and like eating black licorice. There are occasional blips of like tropical fruitiness, maybe some caramelized pineapple funk. It's fairly soft, but it peeks through here and there. There's like a moldiness here as well, not like in a disgusting way. It's almost like a moldy funk, but not like a moldy fruit funk, just moldy. I don't know, I kind of really like it. Wow, honestly, the first thing that really grabs me is how dry it is. Wow, I think I need another sip. There is like this very light initial touch of tropical fruit, but quickly that dissipates. I'm getting a lot of like tannic tea notes. There's a bit of like zippy and zesty rice spice, and there's a definite strong savory earthiness to this. And I'm getting like a good amount of nutmeg. What I'm not really getting is a lot of like funky fruits or anything like that. And the finish is longish and slightly medicinal and like slightly notes of like cough syrup. Does it taste like the nectar of the gods? No, of course not, but nothing can. Did the heavens open up and a chorus of angels start singing? No, of course it didn't. Did it taste like $500? No, of course not. Nothing can actually taste like money. Besides money, I guess. I'm not sure what I was expecting, for it to maybe like taste like a Mai Tai, which I know doesn't make any sense, or to taste maybe similar to other Appleton stuff. But honestly, I'm surprised by it. Surprised by the dry, tannic, rye, savory, zesty nutmegginess of it all, I guess. Maybe I was expecting much more tropical fruit funk. That's not what this is, at least to my palate. And I've read other tasting notes online where people say they get tons of tropical fruit, so your mileage may vary. Now, I like this. I think this is a good rum. I think it's very interesting and very unique compared to a lot of other Jamaican rums I've had. Wow, it really dries up your mouth. I think I need a drink, like a cocktail. And speaking of a cocktail, given that this rum is quote unquote the Mai Tai rum, well, we should probably make a Mai Tai with it. And I just happen to have one right here. And no, it hasn't been sitting there the entire time. I actually made it between cuts. So I actually haven't had this in a Mai Tai yet. This is literally my first experience. I figured it'd be kind of interesting to capture it on camera. So here we go. Cheers. I gotta take another sip. That is very good. The thing that's really impressing me is that it has this really, really long finish. Definitely that rum is shining through. Oh my God, that is very, very good. I like Mai Tais that are a little bit rum forward, and that's what this is doing. Now, I don't know, that might be the slightly higher ABV. It might be all the crazy savory, earthy, rye, nutmeg notes. More rum forward than a lot of Mai Tais I've had. And the orgeat, the lime, the curacao, they're playing supporting roles, but within that supporting role, they're incredibly well balanced. The finish is when you get these like soft, gentle hints of kind of savory spice, maybe some of that nutmeg, but there's still so much complexity. It's a very, what's the palate version of aromatic? What's the word I'm looking for? Flavorful is such like a useless word, so it's not flavorful, but whatever the palate flavor version of aromatic is, that's what this is on the palate, if that makes sense. Better than very good, it's great, maybe better than great, like fantastic. Yeah, let's go with that. Phenomenal? I don't know, tough to say. I'll have to have another one, but it's kind of inching in that direction. Yeah, I think I'm gonna say it here. I think I'll have to have another one of these, but I think if I had to pick between the two, if I had the option of only trying the rum neat or in a Mai Tai, I'd go with the Mai Tai, honestly. And I think as a sipper, it's good, but here in the Mai Tai, it's next level. It really shines. When it comes to what's essentially a $50 to $60 Mai Tai, if we're talking purely cost, I think it's worth the splurge. If it was cheaper and regularly available, I think I'd make these like all the time. Oh, and shout out to Rumba. It's my Rumba glass here. Fantastic, phenomenal rum bar out in Seattle. Much love to them. Well, now you know how I feel about how this rum tastes, but what are my thoughts around the whole release itself? And sure, just like everyone else, I wish that they had made and released more bottles of it. Now, in their defense, in 2005, when they were distilling the marks, maybe Appleton didn't think that the rum and tiki scene would have grown to the size it has. 2005 was a couple years before Smuggler's Cove opened and well before Martin Cape released the Smuggler's Cove book, which kind of ushered in like a whole new wave of tiki and rum folks. If they had known the number of people that would be getting into rum now, they might have doubled or tripled production. It comes down to forecasting, and it's one of those things that you can't always predict correctly. How do I feel about the price? Well, in general, I am totally okay with higher priced rum being a thing, provided that there are still affordable rums out there as well. A growing and healthy spirits category should have prices across the entire spectrum. Now, when it comes to the question of is this worth $500? Well, like I said, I thought it was good, but look, taste is entirely subjective. Really, when we're talking about if this rum is worth $500, I think the important thing to understand is that it's kind of tough to separate the price from its rarity, you know? A lot of the value of that $500 price tag is coming from its limited quantity. Now, if this was a regular year-round unlimited release, would it be worth spending $500 on? For me, the answer would be no. There are plenty of other 100% pot still Jamaican rums that are good both in terms of sipping and mixing, and they're a lot cheaper. However, $500 to own a bit of history and something that will never be made again for a unique and singular experience, is it worth it then? Well, I did kind of buy it, so yeah, I think it might be, for me at least. At the time of recording, I'm not entirely sure how many bottles are still out there and available at retail. I do know a couple of bars like Smuggler's Cove did events in the past week or so where you could get a 1 ounce pour for like $100 or a Mai Tai for $200. Now, I'm not sure if this is something that other bars are going to do, but that might be the best way of getting to try it. Now, Appleton has gotten a lot of press from this release, and the way these things work, that press is gonna far outweigh folks being upset about not getting their hands on it. Now, Joyce Spence has said that this is a one-time thing and they'd never do it again. But just because she or even the company said that doesn't mean they won't necessarily do it again. There's money to be made. I wouldn't put it past them. We'll just have to wait another 17 years to find out. Or maybe they've already remade those marks and they've been aging for a couple of years now. Only time will tell. My guess and hope, given all the reaction to the release, is that Appleton might in the future release like a non-age statement version of this, likely not with all those 4 marks, but something with a similar flavor profile, kind of like a regular release of an affordable Mai Tai rum. I mean, sure, they have like Appleton 8 and 12 year, but I'm thinking of something that's all pot still rum. Those others are like pot and column blends, something that plays in the space of like a Denizen 8 year or Smith & Cross, kind of a go-to rum when you think of a Mai Tai, a spiritual successor to Wray and Nephew 17. So there you go. In the grand scheme of things, I think this is a good tasting rum that makes for a phenomenal Mai Tai. Yeah, I do wish that they had made more of them, and I totally understand why folks are upset. I'm gonna go now and finish that Mai Tai over there, and then I'm gonna make another Mai Tai with this, and this time I'm gonna put in so much pineapple and orange juice. Yeah, just like Trader Vic intended. Thanks for watching. Cheers.